You know what? I think this is also the time when we get into like who, it kind of matters where you're at with your team too. Like if you have a bye, this conversation is completely different, right? Because you're not
Yeah.
worried about Jeremy McNichols. You're worried about players that can help your fantasy playoff teams. And I think if you have a bye secure, or maybe you're one win away for a bye, we only have 2 weeks left. It's week 13. We have 14 next week, which is a week full of another bye-apocalypse that we have 6 teams on bye in week 14. You can kind of start to set your lineup now for 15, 16, 17. So, and if you have a bye, you're only worried about 16 and 17. So those teams that have 9 wins, 10 wins, that look like they're on the right track, I do think like it's a tough thing to do right now with 13, with all teams playing, but I would start to look at some of the cuttable assets on your team. And this is where I think you get really strategic when you have a bye, because there's players you can get rid of that you don't need anymore for depth. And you talked about this before, getting some of those other assets, the league winning type assets, they don't always hit. One of the other things I really like to do is start to look for defenses. And it's not the greatest thing to do in the world, but it's good to have at least one more defense that can get you through 16 and 17. So yeah. I think defenses, it's one of those things. It's not a sexy position, and kickers is probably another one. I paid zero attention to kickers, just for the record, but I do start to look at defenses that look like on teams that not necessarily are bad, but just have loose cannons at quarterback. And I think one thing people do is they always look for the shutout. And I think what's more valuable than a shutout for defenses is the turnovers and the sacks, because that can save you from a team when they score 7 points or 3 points. So I always look for that. Like that's the one thing I will start looking is, who these teams play in 16? Who they play in 17? Like, I want to say the Buffalo Bills have I think they play like the Patriots and the Jets. So for me, I'm already kind of like looking ahead to like who has good matchups in the fantasy playoffs for defenses.
No, 100%. Just looking at it, I mean, there's a defense like the Packers, although I don't know who they play week 17, but one that I was looking at, who was it again? The Falcons, because really the team that I want is whoever's playing the Giants. I feel like the Giants are probably arguably the worst team in the NFL now. It looks like, and what they're saying too is like everything seems like that team has just quit, like kind of given up by like some of their press game conferences and stuff. So that's a team that I would be looking at. The Falcons play them week 16. So if you're a team like that, I mean, I'd go ahead and pick up the Falcons, kind of stash them. I don't think the Falcons are a great defense.
That's part of it too. That's part of it too. It's like you have to make sure it's a good defense, because sometimes these bad defenses or maybe overrated defenses play against teams that, they perform better against them, right? Like losing teams sometimes are like, oh, we're not as bad as you, and they'll at least play to their competition.
One thing I'll say about that is Falcons should be fighting for a playoff spot. So I feel like the Falcons for that game, they're at home. They'll get up for that game, I would say. And the Giants going on the road, once again, I just feel like they're not playing spoiler. I think that they're just like, we're packing it. We're ready for next.
We'll probably see Drew Luck at some point. Like
honestly, but what I would say too is, looking ahead for defenses, kind of getting that. But like in my opinion, I think the most important thing is just stashing those backup running backs. Like I look at whoever's available. Obviously, you get your main ones, Trey Benson, Blake Corum, like those kind of guys out of the way if they're not available. I think some other ones are intriguing. The guy like Khalil Herbert is really intriguing because, Chase Brown's playing a ton of work. He's seeing a ton of work right now where something happens to him. Like he's a guy that I think would just step in there and be the lead back on one of the best offenses. So he's a guy, anybody that like you just look at, this is a good offense. I want one of these backup running backs. I do think that's the time to just start to turn the bottom of your roster, cut some of these guys you would never play in the fantasy playoffs, and just get ready for the run and hope one of these guys maybe you hit. And now you're not only do you have them, but your competition doesn't have them either.
I like it, but I don't. Like I get the appeal of going for like having a roster full of RB2s that could potentially be league winners, but you're also playing roulette. And so it's like not all these guys hit. And I think, it's not a bad idea, I would say, but I wouldn't be dropping I wouldn't be dropping too much talent. Like you can go get maybe one or two of these guys. Like you get a Trey Benson, you go get a Blake Corum, you go get some of these guys. How you mentioned the Khalil Herbert. Like you're going to get some of these Roschon Johnson. Like I don't know whoever the fuck you want to go get. Like you can go get a few of these options, but make sure you're not like I'm just hoarding my bench because the running back most of the time does need to get hurt. The team does need to change directions and be like, okay, we're losing now, so now we're going to get our guy in. And I think it's easy for us to see talent, but that's not always the plan of the NFL team. So I would say when it hits, it works great for you. But then there's other times you got tough start and sit decisions to make now, and you're like, man, I got this player on my team. I wish I would have had somebody else. Somebody gets hurt over 13 or 14. So that's the only thing I would say. Or, you pick up one of those defenses we talk about and you drop them now for one of those running backs, the upside running backs. You might need that defense. I would say this. I didn't get to mention this. I would say this too. Be careful with bad defenses against bad teams. Like Tampa, I want to say Tampa has like 2 easier matchups. Be careful with like trusting bad defenses. And sometimes it's just like bad players. Like if you get a bad running back against, like most of the time, bad running backs are bad for a reason. Like they don't play well. So but I don't know, man. I don't with the backup running backs. It's tough because I want 1 or 2 of those players. I just don't want a whole lot of them on my roster.
I want to be dropping like a Cortland Sutton type of player, right? Like Cortland Sutton can very startable. He's been playing really well as of late. I want to be dropping like a Tyrone Tracy level player either. Like guys that if one of your starters goes down, you feel good about inserting in your starting lineup. Like more of just these fringe type of players. Like if I have, I don't know, backup tight end, obviously.
What if you got like DeAndre Hopkins, who really
I still wouldn't drop him just because he plays on the Chiefs. I'd still give him a little bit of time, but I don't know. I'd have to go through and look at guys that are like near 50% rostered.
Okay, what about like a Romo Dunze? Romo Dunze or one of these running backs?
I'd drop Rome. I would feel okay with it.
What about like, so how do you feel about Jonathan Brooks? Are you keeping Jonathan Brooks or are you dropping him? Because it's tough seeing him not get the work. You're not starting him next week. Like,
I mean, if I don't mind, honestly. Like it's just I don't even know. He had 2 touches.
But then next week he'll have fucking 8.
I mean, I would still hold out. Like it depends on who's available, right? Like I wouldn't drop Jonathan Brooks if a guy, once again, if like Blake Corum was there. I know, like once again, you may never play Blake Corum, but like something happens, we know he's probably could potentially be your RB1 if something happens to Kyren Williams. So if like he got dropped, a guy like Raheem Mostert, personally,
he should be gone.
64% rostered. He doesn't need to be rostered anymore.
No,
like he can be
dropped. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So a guy like Rico Dowdle. I mean, I know that Rico sees a decent amount of work. I mean, he did last week. I guess you could probably hold on to him, but it's like, what's the upside there? Like this offense. I mean, hey, this offense did put up 34. Well, I think they had 2 kick returns for touchdowns.
What about a guy like if you're starting to get down here a little bit? What about a guy like Xavier Worthy? Who we've seen the upside on a week, but he's a tough like weekly start. And I know a lot of people don't like drop him, like you mentioned the KC receivers, but would you rather have him or would you rather have like Trey Benson?
I'd rather have Trey Benson because
that's right.
I don't see a week that you could feel good about starting Xavier Worthy. Like something happens to James Conner, I would feel good about starting Trey Benson 100%.
And I would say the only caveat to that would be like, especially for the teams that do have the bye, the only caveat would be like if you needed to get a win in week 14 and you didn't, what I mean? Like then you still have to have a starter. But like for the most part, these fringe guys, I start getting rid of the players who the question in my mind is if I got to ask if I can start you, most of the time you're not worth the spot at this point of the season, unless I need you for week 14.